Hello and welcome to this episode of the Small Axe Radical Short Film Awards podcast. On this episode, we're joined by Tanja Holm, whose film Stockholm Agreement is screening at our festival. Tanja, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tanja's film Stockholm Agreement is a documentary about the Stockholm peace talks for the current Yemeni conflict. With government and Houthi delegates represented at the peace talks, all seems simple. That is, until further complexities and nuances within the war surface. With this, Stockholm Agreement brings into relief the international nature of this conflict, alongside the critique of the position of the Western state. So, to start off this interview, Tanja, I was hoping if we could, if you would mind telling us a bit about how Stockholm Agreement came to be made.
Yes, so I had lived 5 years in Yemen. And I had filmed a documentary there. I had freelanced as a journalist, reported on several wars in the country, the US drone war. There was a civil war in the north, an uprising in the south, and then the Arab Spring. So I was in Sweden in 2015, launching a book I had written about my 5 years in Yemen. And then I was reached by messages and phone calls that there were fighter jets in the air and that Yemen was being attacked. And that was the start of the ongoing war, which is now in its 8th year. So I was in Sweden, I couldn't return, and I was looking for a way to continue speaking about what's going on in Yemen, because I find Yemen to be the most interesting and intriguing part of the world. And then suddenly, after 3 years of war, almost 4, 2 delegations from Yemen arrived here in Sweden, where I was. And Sweden hosted UN-led peace talks on Yemen. And I knew that I had to do everything I could to just try and capture and tell about what was happening during that week here in Sweden.
So you almost had this position beforehand through your journalism that actually could almost cut through the sort of, if we call it sort of like a Western state media perspective. You'd been on the ground for a long time before, is that right?
Exactly. So I learned what I know about Yemen from inside of Yemen. Mm-hmm. I moved to Yemen without, at that point, have met anyone from Yemen. So I started like on the ground there and had reported on wars and conflict them for 5 years and then followed this. So for me, it's always been the most important to try and see Yemen through a different lens than the one that is in mainstream media, you could say.
Yeah, and this certainly comes through in your film. Particularly, we see this sort of slow emergence of the sort of hypocritical position within the UN and also within Sweden for hosting the talks. I think even at the end, the UN Secretary General, whose name escapes me, I can't remember, I think he's Portuguese.
Antonio Guterres.
There we are, yeah, Antonio Guterres, yes, thank you. He seems to imply that the conflict is sort of only Yemeni-based, sort of denying the international nature. I was sort of wondering, within all this, when you were filming, how did you sort of come to see the peace talks?
Very much as like a Western performance where the international community decided that these peace talks were going to happen, but there were not any real possibilities for an actual change to happen. And the longer they went on day by day, the more absurd I came to watch them. And I wondered if this at all had anything to do with the war with Yemen, or if it was only kind of our conference, an attempt to make us look less evil, you could even say, because the peace talks happened at the same time as the UN said that Yemen is the greatest humanitarian catastrophe on earth. And this catastrophe, which starves the Yemeni people and and puts millions of Yemenis like in a hunger, throws them into hunger. That I mean, this disaster happens because of a war which is backed by Western powers, and a war which has a lot to do not only with internal Yemeni conflicts, but also by other powers in the world.
Mm-hmm. So that position you're talking about at the end there really comes through. I'm thinking sort of the scene where you have both Yemeni and Swedish people protesting with the banners and sort of the megaphones and everything. And so you sort of the idea you're saying within this is that at the same time as trying to cultivate this image, there's also the dark underside of sort of the arms trade and everything. So I was wondering, sort of, with this, if you could elaborate on what you were just sort of starting to say. How do you sort of see this position, particularly for Sweden as someone as, but for multiple sort of Western countries, US, UK, how do you see this position as both sort of peace talk hosts and
I see Sweden as an abuser, like, you know, a violent man that hits with one hand and then comforts his victim with the other hand. So with one hand, Sweden supplies weapon technology to the warring parties in the Yemen war. And this weapon technology upholds a partial blockade which starves the civilian population. And with the other hand, we negotiate for peace and we host these peace talks. And this happens at the very same time. And the scene with the demonstration, which you bring up, is an attempt to, in the film, show that and reveal that. It's the only scene in the film that happens apart from the castle where the talks take place, but it's still in the same city. It's still in Stockholm, and there with the megaphones and all that's happening, we find out that at the same time there's a new weapons deal going on between Sweden and Saudi Arabia for more for more weapon technology, and it's not commented at the actual peace talks. You see the Swedish Foreign Ministry of Affairs, there's not a mention of it.
Yes, so there's
absurd, right?
Yes, totally absurd. So it's sort of interesting what you said then, because the demonstration was also taking place in the same city, but we sort of get this image at the start of you trying to get into the peace talks, and the sort of heavy police presence around. There's sort of this active, at the same time as projecting the media images, there's this active distance. So I was wondering if, yes, I mean, this is a question I haven't given you, but your thoughts on this distance that they're creating.
Yes, so I try, as you say, I tried to get into, I really wanted to film what was going on. And I made attempts after attempts after attempts to find out, are the rumors I am hearing from my friends in Yemen true? Are there going to be peace talks? So the foreign ministry denied it. I applied for accreditation 1-2 times, no message. And it was by chance that I spoke to one of the delegates. He was in Sana. He said, we travel in a few hours to Stockholm. There will be peace talks. We will be at that place. I met a fellow journalist that I got to know during my years in Yemen, and he brought me actually to the foreign ministry, and he got my accreditation. So it was the Yemenis that pushed for my presence at the peace talks. Otherwise, it would have only been like mainstream media or whatever you could call them. So they got me in. I was there. I managed to get through the police and through all these hinders at the way. And then I was there, I stayed there, but I knew that the peace talks went on for 8 days. I knew that one of the days there was going to be a demonstration, outside of this area, and that was the only time where I filmed at another location. And it was because I think it is so important when we talk about the war in Yemen to also talk about our own involvement and our own guilt, and not only speak about the conflict between Ansar Allah or the Houthis and the Hadi government, but or the internationally recognized government, which it was called, but to actually speak about, like, it was the US was putting petrol or whatever shit is needed to fight to fly those jets over Yemen and bomb, and it's UK and French weapons, it's Swedish weapon technology. I mean, we have a quite brutal involvement in this conflict, and we have made this war possible to go on year after year after year.
So, sort of moving away from these ideas of sort of the Western state, I think there's a much more pertinent issue in your film, and it's sort of anchored within the Yemeni journalist who I assume you've befriended and are familiar with, Manal al-Wasabi. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yes, it is.
So I was wondering, sort of at this stage, I know sort of your film features a talk in 2021, so last year. Do you still have contact with her now? And sort of with the year gap almost, how is the situation in Yemen?
Yes, so my film starts in 2018 and goes on till 2021. So at the end, that's where we leave Manal. And then I'm still in touch with her. She wrote me today that she's fine.
Oh, wow. Yes.
So we talk and we send messages back and forth. She's working in Hodeidah, where she lives with her family, and she's a freelance journalist, and she continues to report on developments and what is happening. And I'm also in touch with other friends and colleagues inside Yemen. The situation is difficult, but there is a truce right now, which has been extended till August, the beginning of August. So there seem to be possibilities ahead for a more peaceful development, but one never really knows. The war. What I hope to show with the film also is how complex the war is, and that there are many parties involved in this conflict. It's not only a conflict between, if we look at Yemen, it's not only a conflict between those two groups that have delegations that represent them at the peace talks. There are other groups, there are more grievances, there are more conflicts. So in order to make peace possible in Yemen, it's necessary to have much more local initiatives, I think, and to involve more groups. And there seem to be steps taken in that direction. But with Yemen, I've learned over the years to kind of not look too much into the future, because time and again, it has surprised me and kind of devastated me what has happened. But yeah. Today, Manal had a good day, and there is this truce, and I suppose, I mean, the hope is still there, you know.
So we sort of come to the end of the interview here, and just to wrap up, I'd like to ask you if there are any projects or groups or films you're working on within the near future.
Yes, I'm in post-production with another film about Yemen, and I have filmed it here in my home city, Stockholm, where I have a camera on my shoulder, and I go out and I ask hundreds of people how we stop the war in Yemen. They don't want to talk to me. They push my camera away. People are more eager to discuss the war in Ukraine, but I keep pushing for Yemen, and I'm editing that into a story about a fucked up world and feeling powerless, I suppose.
Well, best of luck with that to you, and I hope it as with this film achieves, you know, this level at which you're projecting the necessity of talking about the Yemen war. So thank you very much, Tanja, for your time today and your chat. And yes, I wish you the best for the future.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you very much. And thank you for screening Stockholm Agreement.
No, wonderful. No problem.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye now.